welcome to Mystere Creations. Today we are interviewing David, the London spy. David conducts tours of London, showcasing the complex history of the city. His infectious enthusiasm sets him apart, and he offers many themed tours for those wishing to delve deep into a specific topic, including Harry Potter tours. This is part one of a two-part episode. Please enjoy!
Welcome to our show, David. How are you doing today?
Fantastic. I got money for nothing today. I was meant to be doing a royal history tour of Westminster, but I got a call from the client saying they weren't feeling very well. I offered to reschedule, but they couldn't make it. So, but luckily it was through a tour company, so I'm getting paid, and I didn't have to work, which is all. Which is fine. I feel sad to the client though, because I really love doing my tours, and I would have enjoyed doing it as well, but I had plenty of other things to get on with. Lots of reading.
True. What are you reading right now?
Well, my name on the internet is The London Spy. Yeah. But ironically, I didn't choose that name because of any connection to spying. I chose it because of this book. Hold on, reaching up to my shelf, which just happened to be here. The London Spy. And don't tell my wife, but I splashed out a lot of money on buying a first edition of this book. It was published in about the year 1700 by a publisher's. This is it. By a man called Ned Ward, and this is it. It was published as a pamphlet in several parts, which exposed the seamy underbelly of London life. So each one had a different, it was like a road trip through 18th century London, and he exposed all the unpleasant things in London, the stinking streets, the law courts, corruption, prisons, terrible swearing, etc., crime, etc. So I've chosen that to be my name because I like to explore the underbelly of things. So I'm always looking into the secret stories, ordinary people's lives in many cases. But certainly for my tour guiding, I love to have a place with a story, and often an object as well that I bring along to illuminate the tours also. So that's one called London Spy. But today I've been reading a series of spy novels because I do actually do spy tours as well. I branched out into them because so many people asked me, do you do spy tours? And I thought, why not? And so I'm reading a trilogy of books at the moment. I'm just finished the second one. It's a man called Jason Matthews. He sadly was an operator. He died a few years ago. But the first book was called Red Sparrow, and that was turned into a fantastic film. But the books are even better. So I'm just finished the second one about half an hour ago. And that's what I've been reading.
Excellent. Can you tell us a little bit about your tours and yourself, please?
Yeah, sure. So I am a qualified London tour guide. I am both a qualified guide for the City of London. This is the first qualification I took. And but my background was I worked in London for 25 years. And I was always obsessed with my environment. So every lunchtime, I'd be out and about investigating the history that I could find. And in central London in particular, in the city, the oldest part, you can't walk more than a few yards without noticing something. You think, what is that? What does it mean? Yeah. And then I discovered that the Corporation of London run an annual course part-time to qualify as a City of London guide. And I applied, eventually got on. It's very competitive, but very, very rewarding. It was the key to my new career, because previously I had been in the City of London, which is the financial district of London, and I had what you might call a career in finance, in that I started as a photocopy operator. I was in between jobs. I'd been sacked from what I thought was my dream job, working for a charity in London, and my then-to-be wife said, get a job, otherwise, etc. So I thought, let's find something temp and do something that allows me to decide what I really want to do. But of course, life is what happens when you're not looking. And so I started photocopying in investment banks, in big law firms. And eventually I got taken on by one of them because my background is I got a classics degree in Latin and ancient Greek. But I've also done a postgraduate degree in IT for arts graduates. It was like a government funded scheme. And it paid off because I had to do tech skills. And very dull, but they were converting from an analog print to digital print. And I was there to put the systems in place. So they gave me a job with the company, with Deutsche Bank, and I was a photocopy operator. And eventually, after 25 years, I became vice president at Deutsche Bank. I still can't believe it. And I took early retirement at 56 with a reasonable pension. And ever since then, I've become full-time guide. And it's a real late discovery for me of what I consider to be my vocation. And I've made it into a job, and I can't get I wake up every morning thanking Providence for what's happened. Touch wood. It's great, and I tour most days now. I'm lucky enough to have a fairly large network through LinkedIn of my years in the city. So I do a lot of corporate work, also entertaining families. And again, you probably found about me through TikTok.
Yes.
So we'll come back to it later. But I am an accidental TikTok influencer, bizarrely. We'll come back to that a bit later. And so I get a lot of work with that as well. Plus, I do work with selected tour companies too. But the one thing I don't do is do public tours, because I'm very bad at marketing. So if you want to be on one of my tours, just send me an email.
Okay.
David at thelondonspy.com, and I'll get back in touch with you. So that's what I do. I'm now a professional London guide, but it's because I'm obsessed with London history, stories, objects, artifacts, books, that feeds me. And I enjoy researching as much as I do actually guiding as well.
How far back does London history go?
London itself is a Roman creation. I mean, there were some villages scattered along parts of the Thames, mostly to where Heathrow Airport is now, more to the far west side of it as well. But there was nothing really here before the Romans came. And there's a science called dendrochronology. I'm not sure. It's about, you take a piece of wood, and depending on the size of the rings in the wood, you can date it based on climatic conditions.
Yes.
And therefore, when that wood was cut down. And there's a piece of wood found in a well next to where the earliest settlement in London was, a place called Number One Poultry, a building that's been voted the ugliest building in London. When it was excavated, they found a well there that was dated to 47 AD, and the invasion was 43. So it's really, really early stuff, first century AD or CE, depending on how you view your dates. Whatever, I'll go with whatever people want on that. It's that old, and it's astonishing, and therefore, but that's the city of London.
Yeah. And
the rest of London is much, much newer than that. The city is the real original London. And that's where I was working. So and because my degree is in Latin and ancient Greek, it all fell together and allowed me to get this holistic view. So London is, almost 2,000 years old, give or take 20 years or so.
That's excellent. I've done a 3D rendition of the underground of London from the 1860s, I think.
Right.
And that was for Gary Gygax, the guy who created Dungeons and
Dragons.
Yeah.
I was a massive D&D player back in the 70s, late 70s.
Wonderful.
Yeah, I've still got some of the original modules somewhere, I think. But yeah.
Excellent. Perhaps we should do a game online sometime.
So, 1860, that was when the real underground took off. That was when the first cut and cover, so like fairly low level before the really deep stuff we get later on as well. But that's what led to the depopulation of central London as well, particularly the city of London. Because so many people used to live in the city above the shop, as it were, but the railways brought suburban living, and that had a really bad effect in one aspect of the city of London, which is the churches. And this isn't something that people really often appreciate. Normally people assume that the loss of the ancient medieval churches in the city of London was predominantly due to the Great Fire of London. Yeah. And there was a shrinkage at that point from about 96 to about 53 after the fire. And they were mostly rebuilt almost exclusively by Christopher Wren. They're this brilliant architect, one of the greatest British people who ever lived. We're celebrating the 300th anniversary of his death this year as well. So there's lots of Wren 300 celebrations, which I'm doing tours on too. So he rebuilt most of the city's churches. But the Blitz lost a few of them. But what many people don't realize is that with the coming of the railways, the people weren't living in central London, in the city anymore. And so the churches were losing their congregations. The church approached Parliament to enact an act called the Union of Benefices, which allowed the church to sell off and amalgamate congregations. And I think it was 2024 in the 20s, Christopher Wren churches were auctioned off and destroyed and turned into offices in the 1870s and 1880s. And nowadays, these would all be what we know as grade 1 listed buildings. I'm not sure we have the same concept of a listed building, protect the very high level, the top possible grade. They were just destroyed. And, absolutely horrific. And you see the plaques for them nowadays. And I've got a book called The Lost Churches in the City of London somewhere. It's in my shelves and it's not really to hand. But such a tragedy. And that's all due to the railways. So, not always a good thing came from them.
From modernization, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. We've lost quite a few historic buildings in Victoria of late.
Okay.
Mostly due to the fact that earthquake upgrades, they can't really preserve them the way they should be able to, because they're not earthquake safe.
Yeah, understandable. You've had terrible earthquakes in San Francisco, haven't you? Obviously, in the years, and Lisbon. So it makes sense. But it's interesting how sometimes, particularly with an ancient city like London, new buildings do give the opportunity to find amazing discoveries. So, for example, in the 1840s, London was building a coal exchange, and coal was one of the massive products of the empire, exported around the world. Coal would be brought to London, where it would be sold and taxed. And as part of that expansion of power, they needed a new building. So they called it the Coal Exchange. And it was on the waterfront area by Customs House and Billingsgate Fish Market. And it was a huge temple to Victorian endeavour. Absolutely top quality materials as well. As they were digging it, the architect, a man called James Bunning, they uncovered some Roman remains in the basement of it. And that this was at a time when there wasn't any acts protecting these buildings.
Okay.
And in fact, a few years later, when they were excavating a train station, actually, Blackfriars, I think it was Cannon Street train station, they found more Roman remains there, which they just promptly dynamited. So this fact that James Bunning had the foresight to protect what he found there, which he did, is very unusual. And nowadays, it was discovered. Actually, I've got some original documents for that here. Give me a second. My filing cabinet. I'm looking for Billingsgate. Here we go. This is it. This is the example of what I just collect these incredible, rare documents. So what I have here, this is the very first ever public description of the discovery of what turned out to be a Roman bathhouse on the site of what was the Coal Exchange. This is the original London News with all the adverts you can see for various. I love these adverts because they give you an insight into what life was like at the time as well. But on the front of it, you have here the very first appearance of any reference to what they discovered, which was this Victorian Roman bathhouse. So you can see here, this is part of the side. You've got a man here standing with a top hat. You can see how tall the monuments were they've discovered here as well. And there's some further descriptions here of some of the objects that were found there. They've even got here a reference to the Hypocaust as well. And it was a genuine Roman bathhouse dating from about the year 200 CE, AD, which had been covered up and was uncovered in the 1840s because of a new building coming through. And the irony is that only half of it was uncovered then, and it wasn't really fully itemized or researched. It was only in the 1960s when they had to pull down the original Coal Exchange a second time because of the widening of the road in Billing, that they got the rest of it out. And it's now you can visit it on Saturdays. I'm a regular guide there. I'm there in a couple of weeks' time. It's called the Billingsgate Roman Bathhouse. And it's it's bizarre. It's a mystery because it's a private house. And it normally would have had like 3 wings, 2 wings and a back end of it. And it was right next to the river. very desirable residence, very upmarket place.
Yeah.
No one's found in it, surprisingly, but the middle courtyard area, suddenly, about 50 years after it was built, they put this huge bathhouse there, which is a really ugly object that didn't fit into what you'd expect to be there. And no one knows why it was put there. So I've got here a map showing you. By the way, is this the sort of stuff your clients are interested in? If I'm going on too much, going into much detail, just let me know.
The more detail, the better, because we archive everything that we do.
Okay.
And this goes into the historical side of things, and show and tell is always great.
Fantastic. In that case, so what we've got here is this is what is left. So you've got the wing here, which is where you enter this nowadays. You come down to the staircase here, and you go in, and you see they've got gantries all across it. So you follow across it and go up along it, and back down this side. So you can see that this is the east wing. You've got the north wing here, and the west wing unfortunately doesn't exist. So here, but we're pretty certain it was there, but there's no record of it, unfortunately. But this bathhouse is the bit that was added in about 50 years later, and there are all sorts of potential reasons why it might have been added. It may have been that the private house was changed into what's called a mansio, like an inn, because it's quite close to one of the original gates into Roman London in the Roman wall. It could have been a house of ill repute. The other potential explanations are that this the frigidarium here is the same dimensions as a temple, and it may be that it was a two-stage development. It may be like a Roman temple originally, and then the bathhouse sections added a bit later on as well. Because they are slightly different construction standard. There's like a gap between them. It's not been properly rendered, and different quality material in it as well. Very interesting. But no one knows why this was added. The other thing is that there may have been a wall built along the riverside just before the bathhouse was added as well, which may have destroyed the view and therefore made it less of an eyesore to have it there too. But it's an incredible place to visit. It's only in the last few years been opened up to the public. It only used to be open once a year before then, so it's a new initiative, relatively, run by the city guides. I remember also you had to be a city guide to guide there, but open every Saturday for 3 tours, and it's incredible because also it's been preserved in a way that makes it look as if it's a live dig. So unlike, for example, there's another place in London called the Mithraeum, which is a temple to the god Mithras that was discovered in the 50s, neglected for many years, and then as part of the building of I can't remember the name of the headquarters now. Bloomberg's headquarters in London, which is £1 billion it cost to build that building. It won the Sterling Prize for the best building of the year, Royal Institute of British Architects style. But anyway, in the basement, they've recited the original Roman temple there as well. But it's an entirely different experience. So the temple is curated, and it's very much an experience. Almost, it's quite, I don't want to be critical, it's a bit Disneyfied in the sense that you're directed through it. It's very much sound and light, and you get quite distant from it. You're looking at it rather than engaging with it.
Yeah.
Whereas this, it's very raw. And it's one of my most popular TikToks, by the way, is me just taking a group through here and explaining how it's a nondescript modern office block. And you just walk through the doors, and suddenly you descend this very rough, it's like a building site, and you descend this very rough staircase that's unfinished, and suddenly you're presented with this Roman bathhouse, which is just absolutely stunning. And it's been left, so it's almost as if the archaeologists have just stepped outside for a cup of tea or a cigarette or whatever, and it's left for you to add your own interpretation to. So it's very much, there's no signage at all. It's really, there's a lot of objects to see as well. So, for example, as a bathhouse, you often get the chance to talk about Roman bathing habits as well, which always fascinates. So I've invested in my own strigil, which is what would have been used to remove the oil that you would have covered yourself in because they didn't have soap. I've also got a selection of like the earwax remover. I can't find it at the moment. I'm not very pleasant to see anyway, to be honest. The nail, etc., etc. Actually, one of my most contested TikTok videos was all about Roman bathing habits, because I blithely did a video in which I stepped out of my shower and explained that it is widely believed, but a lot of people don't agree. I will say that now, that the Romans didn't. Well, they, instead of toilet paper, you may have heard the story. They allegedly used a sponge on a stick that was dipped in a bucket with vinegar and salt. So
Oh.
not a personal, not like a personal toothbrush which you just use for yourself, but a communal one that we would share with the family, whoever's in the house. I didn't illustrate one ready made, but I didn't illustrate it. It was for illustrative purposes.
Mhm.
That's all. In my bathroom to show the, etc. And I got so much, not abuse, but a lot of people disagreed. I did get back to the original texts, which give it some evidence. It's not 100% cut and dyed, but I'd say it's pretty. For example, it talks about a gladiator who committed suicide by stuffing this sponge down his throat. What a horrible way to die.
Oh, that's horrible. Wow.
I found, okay, this is it here. This is the objects that I show on my tour. So you've got here, this is the little spoon, hold on, put it up here, that you would use to move your ear wax with. This is the cleaner that you would use. So I'm not used to the camera directions here. You would use to put into your fingernails to remove
dirt
and toe jam, because obviously your feet were very dirty. And the tweezers that would be used for depilation for nose hair, ear hair, and body hair, because the Romans also were very keen on total body depilation.
Okay.
And again, this is the private, but for the public baths, there's the story of I think it was a poet who lived above a bath in Rome, and he kept complaining because of the shrieks from people who were having their nose and ear hair from them all day long, and kept him from writing his poetic works. So that's another fantastic place to visit, the Billingsgate Roman Bathhouse. And it was only uncovered because of a Victorian building. And then when that Victorian building itself had to come down in the 1960s, the enterprising City of London archaeologist, Peter Marsden, brilliant man, single-handedly saved it. And he actually uncovered the rest of the house, so the whole of the East Wing. And it was an initiative that led to the reopening of it and creating it as a scheduled ancient monument, and essentially allowing it to be preserved for this unique experience that people can visit nowadays. And if you're ever in London, I highly recommend it as one of many things you can see. Anyway, so I digress, but
we plan a trip to come see you and do a tour and all of that. I have family in the south of England, in Jersey Island.
Oh, okay. Well, I was in Guernsey for my holiday a few weeks ago, either next door to it. So
wonderful.
But if you ever, just let me know if you're ever around here. I'll be very happy to give you a tour.
Thank you. What came to mind when you were talking about the bathhouse, a private bathhouse attached to a temple? Certain parts of the Roman religion, like Aphrodite, they bathed before they went into the temple.
Yeah, I mean, bathing is a common occurrence in multiple religions. Obviously, in Islam, you have to wash before you enter the mosque. I think in interesting. I mean, bathing was an essential part of Roman life. Some people would bathe multiple times a day. It did have obviously religious connotations as well, and cleanliness generally also, and ritual bathing before and after various ceremonies too. But there's an issue with the cult. I mean, it's not quite a cult as we know it, but the religion of Mithras. That unfortunately, it was a mystery, and it's been kept as such. So it was exclusively a male religion. We know that, and we know that much like Masonry, Freemasonry, there were levels or orders within it that you could rise. But beyond that, there's been some recent research done where, I mean, they tend to follow where soldiers were. So there are quite a few Mithraic temples in north of England, particularly alongside where the Roman walls were, the Antonine Wall and the Hadrian's Wall were. They've discovered, I believe I read, it's quite a recent discovery, a lot of crushed shells, I think, or some crushed earth on the floor of it. They think it's part of the ceremony that we continually refreshed as well. So there was a sense of clean earth as well, not just as the body, it's part of the ceremony. But again, I wouldn't like to, suggest what was behind it as well.
Crushed shell is used as a cleanser in a lot of pagan modern day. So it may have been
Hey.
something along that lines.
Yeah. Well, the other interesting thing is that talking about crushed shells as a use, I was in Westminster yesterday doing a tour for a group, and we were along a street called Pall Mall,
Mhm.
which is in St James's area. It goes all the way from St James's Palace to uh, Trafalgar Square. And I could be wrong here, but my recollection is that there was a game that was played along there called Pell Mell, which was actually almost like a modern form of an ancient form of Quidditch, because
Okay.
it was a ball that was the ground was made of crushed shells all the way along the pitch, a long thin pitch,
Yeah.
and you would have mallets, a bit like bludgers or whatever, the quaffles, whatever the bats that you would use in,
Yeah.
and you'd have to try and hit the ball quite big, I think, along the ground. But at each end of the pitch, there was a hoop that was about 5 foot, 6 foot high in the air. And to win the game, you had to knock the ball through the hoop. So I don't know whether J.K. Rowling was aware of this or just, whatever. But
Yeah.
anyway, it always amused me. But the ground was also made of crushed shells for the entire pitch as well. This would have been in the 18th century, I think. So, who knows?
Well,
It's all very strange.
crushed shells prevent weeds from growing up. So
Okay, right. So it made it a nice ground to
yeah,
play.
kept it nice and even so that the ball would roll properly.
Yeah, or maybe it's a bit like petanque, that it would not move too much after it hit the ground. So it was
Yeah.
like,
True. Incentive
excellent.
to keep it in the air.
Absolutely.
In addition to your tours, your historical tours, you do some magical tours. Can you tell us a little bit about those?
Well, yeah, I mean, one of my other passions is magic. Um, it all started many years ago because my wife is a professional stand-up comedian, which may explain why she was so keen for me to have a proper job when I started going out with her to help her with her
Sure.
career in that sense. And she knew lots of performers on the circuit, one of whom happened to be a magician. And at the beginning, I just helped him a little bit. I did some sound for one of his techs at a big festival because he was quite rock and roll at that time. Um, I'm not sure if you ever know, but his name is Jerry Sadowitz, and he is one of the true geniuses I've ever met in life. The whole of life I've been. He's genius in two levels as a magician and as a comedian as well. And he's a very extreme comedian,
Yeah.
and he's had lots of issues with that, but he's very bright, intelligent,
Mm.
self-taught, I believe, and he's a very, very interesting person. But as a magician, he eventually, as I was beginning magic, offered to teach me. And sadly, we no longer have lessons with each other, but I still buy his magazines off him every so often when he publishes them. But it was a bit like having guitar lessons from Jimi Hendrix, or, it was just. And the thing about him is, although he's got a very extreme personality, in real life, he's very generous and he's very, very keen to ensure that you learn the right technique. So he said that you must buy a book to start out with, and it's one of the key texts in magic. And it just so happens to be on the shelf in front of me, the Royal Road to Card Magic. So this is the very edition which he asked me to buy, and I asked him to sign it for me, but no, he didn't think he was worthy, I suspect. Anyway, and he said you should start with this, and it was a bit like with him having apostolic laying on of hands, because he himself had studied with geniuses. He'd gone with this guy called Dave Vernon, who was known as the Master, one of the greatest magicians of the 20th century, who he'd actually gone out to America to meet him and shown him some tricks that got him in with him. And he was very, very clear, very generous, very kind, and he just was patient. And I started doing magic. And to be absolutely honest, the reason I started doing magic was because I thought it would make me more interesting. I had very sad, I was very low self-esteem at that point. Yeah, I didn't really thought I was very ugly as well. But I started doing magic at work,
Mhm.
and it may well be why my career sort of stalled a bit at Deutsche Bank, because I could have maybe gone a bit higher, but who cares, But I've got such a great response that I thought there's something in this. And then I started doing corporate work a bit at Deutsche Bank, mostly volunteering for charities. And then I started doing paid work. And then I joined the Magic Circle, which is this amazing institution formed in about 1906. Kill me if I got that wrong, but it's nowadays the most prestigious magic association in the world. And you have to pass an audition to get in. King Charles is also a member as well. He joined in 1975, and you have to have nowadays you have to have an interview, and you're to prove that you're keen and genuine, and then they turn you into an apprentice, and you've got a period of time. I think now it's a year. Used to be a bit longer before you had to prepare to do your proper audition, which is in front of a large group of magicians, some of whom will be the examiners, and they've got a set list which they share with you beforehand of what you need to prove. So there's absolutely no way that you're going to be able to fool them unless you're a total genius, in which case you do get promoted to the inner circle immediately. And one of my friends did have that happen to him. Christian Grace, big plug for him. He's a fantastic magician. But otherwise, if you're just a run-of-the-mill jobbing wizard like me, then you basically get the chance to just prove you're competent, have a certain degree of show personship and some skills. You can get away with self-working magic if you're really good, but it's advised that you do a certain degree of skill level as well. And and I got in eventually. I won't say how many times it took me, but I did to get in there about 3 years ago. And I've been incorporating magic into my tour guiding ever since as well, in a natural way. I don't try to force it, because there's nothing worse than shoehorning something into a tour. If it's but what I've done is the type of tour that it most links into, as you might guess, are Harry Potter tours, and it's a perfect match. So, in fact, for my audition with the Magic Circle, I created a routine that linked back to itself at the end. So it was a natural callback, as you say, which is like comedians often have a callback as well. It's like a way to it's the audience for remembering something that you started at the beginning. And so I had like 4 routines. It was like I changed the money, Muggle money, into wizard money in front of their eyes. Then I gave them a note, and then I had a story about Ron, Harry, and Hermione, and using different lengths of rope to demonstrate that when they fought Voldemort, they all needed to have the same level, and all the ropes suddenly became the same length. Then I had a routine about, I had a deck of cards, the 4 houses. So I just did a magic trick with a deck of cards. I called it twisting the houses, where the houses all magically turned around in the deck upside down, except for Slytherin, which refused to obey me. And then suddenly at the end, I had to really hit the deck, and they were upside down as well. So Slytherin obviously being the sneaky ones that don't do the rest, etc., etc. And finally, I did a reveal in which they chose a location on the Marauders map, which I had a copy of, and it turned out that location, which they freely chose, was written on the banknote which I had given them at the beginning when I changed their Muggle money into wizard money as well. So that was a structure I built into my routine, which I was very pleased about. And I've been using a variety of those tricks on my real life tours. So, for example, I've got here my own Bank of Potter Visa card. I use this stuff. I've also had a friend of mine is a fantastic designer, and did by magic. He designed for me this. This is the Daily Prophet. Obviously, it's the City edition. Otherwise, it would be the Daily Prophet. And it is a newspaper with me in it, just over here, and it's full of stories, and it's like a genuine newspaper. I've had a couple of hundred printed up, and I give it away at the end of my tours as a prize, so people can. So I have a house quiz on my tours. So I sort people into the 4 houses at the beginning using a sorting hat, which I then have the quiz, and I make sure that the quiz are all multiple choice, so that even if you're a complete muggle, you've still got a chance of getting it right. And I vary the difficulty of the questions as well, depending on the audience, etc., etc. But people really love gamifying a tour experience. I find that they get quite competitive sometimes, or certainly in teams, they sort of, it allows them to feel more involved than just a normal lecture that I'm giving them. And and I ask about like 20 questions or so in the course of a tour. And I try to get one at every stop, but sometimes I forget. And at the end, you know, if there's a tie, then I've got a tiebreaker. So you know, there's always a winner, and it works really well. What I'm actually planning to do, I haven't done it yet, is I would like at some point to. There's a special magic effect called Torn and Restored newspaper, and I want to leave a copy of the Daily Prophet, which is suitable to be used for this Torn and Restored effect, in a shop on the route. And at some point, I want to set it up so that the shopkeeper knows I'm coming, or I just give them a nip, and I keep it behind the counter. And at some point, I'll give my group some of the magic money I've got, either the Harry Potter note that I've given at the beginning, or I've got some coins as well, the sickles, knuts, and galleons. And I say, take this into that shop and offer it to the keeper, and see whether they recognise it, and if they'll give you something in return. So that's why I want to set it up so that they come back with the paper, which I then take and use to perform the torn and restored newspaper effect. I haven't done it yet, so I'm giving it away now. But anyway, that's what I'm planning to do at some point.
That's excellent. I love that idea. That makes it fun. You got to have fun when you're doing tours, and
yeah,
I think
that's see, I view my tours. I view my role. Obviously, you've got to make sure that you entertain and inform and educate, but above all, I just want to make friends with people. That's what I'm trying to do. I just want to make them feel as if they're having a friendly conversation on a walk. And, you know, and to me, that's the key. And it's, you know, I think that's also how I think my TikTok really sort of took off by accident. You know, it was total, just me being myself. And it works for me because TikTok is unlike other mediums. I think it rewards authenticity. And that's why I think a lot of corporates and brands find it really hard to break into TikTok, because people can sniff out if you're inauthentic in any way, or if you're being paid to promote stuff, or if you're not genuinely enthusiastic about something. And I'm a fairly enthusiastic person. So for me, it's just a natural extension of my own street performance as a tour guide or as a magician to be able to put it off. So I don't really have to work very hard to make videos that people seem to enjoy.
It's good. It's good. I enjoy your TikTok videos. That's where we were introduced to you, and the authenticity of it, but also the history that you bring forward is wonderful.
Well, yeah, I mean, as I said, I love researching. So I'm going to move my camera out of it now and just give you this is just a fraction of the books that I've got, most of which are about London. I've got huge notes on the shelf behind me as well. They're all stacked under my desk also here. Got large volumes of it as well too. So yeah, my family complain that I've invaded the whole house with my books. More books here. I buy a book a day, I'd say. Mostly off eBay. You know, and so I've got a huge backlog because there's no way, even with the books I currently have, that I'm ever going to be able to read them all before I die. But yeah, books do furnish a room, as they say. I think they're good wallpaper. And you know, the thing is, I know I don't need to be able to read the entire book to know what to get out of it. So I know that a book covers a certain topic. I'm a fairly fast reader, so I can just use the index, obviously, as well. But I can just skim through it and find something. But what I really I'm wary of, and I've been burnt a few times on TikTok, is making mistakes and saying stuff that I find out later isn't true. So, and particularly with London history, there's a lot of apocryphal stories that you need to learn. You need to just contextualize them and make sure you ever say things like, you know, it is believed, or it is said, or some people say. And then, but again, I don't deliberately do it, but some of my TikToks have blown up without me being involved in them, where I refer to something that might be controversial, and you get the whole people shouting at each other on it, and I just stand back, unless obviously they're being exceptionally offensive or, you know, racist, sexist, homophobic, whatever, in which case I just delete. But otherwise, you know, it's for example, there's a lot of stuff about Margaret Thatcher in London, and she's a perennial favourite of people to either attack her or to worship her. You know, I've got my own view. I try not to give my own opinion about much stuff that's too controversial either. Yeah. There's no point. I'm not interested in what I believe. They're interested in the stories behind it, you know. But it's fascinating to just. And again, I don't want to sound as if I'm being too professional about using TikTok. Because there are so many videos that I get from people saying this, if you how to break the algorithm, how to game the system.
Yeah.
I just want to share what I love. That's all it is. And
Yeah.
if it happens popular, so I don't care if I don't get many views because I know that I'm just doing myself justice. You know. And so yeah, and but recently I've started to get paid by TikTok as well, which is bizarre. There's a new feature they brought in, the creator program beta,
Okay.
and really pays a lot of money, surprisingly. I mean, I've earned about £350 in the first 30 days. So if that carries
Okay.
on, I'll be earning about maybe £4,000 a year.
That's good.
It's bizarre. And if you're from the Inland Revenue, yes, I will be declaring it. Um, but it's yeah. So, but I don't want to get sucked into it. For me, it's not. It's not my. I'm not a TikTok influencer as my profession. I'm a tour guide who happens to do TikToks, and it's just because of my tour guiding that everything else follows from that, and my research and my history and my stories.
Well, talking about spies earlier, can you talk a little bit about the London spy uh, tours
Yeah,
and
yeah.
perhaps some in-depth ideas
Well, yeah.
how spies became a thing in London?
Yeah, and again, I've got some objects to share with you in my file
Wonderful.
behind me. So this is a book I'm reading at the moment, by the way. I'm looking back. There's a really good book if you're interested. There's a woman called Amaryllis Fox.
Yeah.
She wrote a book a couple of years ago, exposing her life in the CIA, A Life Undercover. I think it was called. It was optioned for a Netflix series. I'm not sure if it was ever made. It's a sort of book that it gets a certain degree of hype because allegedly she gave away stuff that she wasn't meant to say. This is another book that I find very useful as well. Here we go. 500 spy sites and unclassified. The problem with this book is it's infuriating because everything in it is chronological and there's no index. So you've got these 500 places, but unless I'm actually creating my own index for the book now, because otherwise you just can't find anything in it. You have to read the entire book every time you want to find one thing, but it's not actually indexed anyway that allows you to look at it by location. So if you're the author and you're reading this, please do something about it. But I can't get hold of the people actually. They seem to have gone underground.
Okay.
Yeah. Right. So my spy tours. There we go. I've got some more stuff over here as well. I've got a file somewhere with some extra things in it. Oh, okay, I'll find that a bit later. Um, so yes, so there's a history of spying in Britain that goes back as far as Francis Walsingham, who was the spy master of Queen Elizabeth I, and he was responsible, amongst other things, for protecting her against Catholics, particularly against her relative Mary, Queen of Scots. Also, he employed cryptographers to break the various codes that were being used by her supporters to communicate with her, which also led to her eventual arrest, imprisonment, and execution. Actually, that's really interesting. In the last few weeks, you may have read this in the news, some researchers in France have cracked further letters, which they now understand were actually from her, that were in a really, really difficult code that hadn't been deciphered before. And independent researchers discovered this code and they decrypted it and realized it's her own letters that were just stuffed away in some Paris archive somewhere. They didn't know who they were from. Now they've been attributed to her. So Francis Walsingham did it then during the Civil Wars. You had people like Francis Morland. You even had these machines that were made to open the post and invisibly close it as well. But in the 19th century, there was a really fascinating step back to spying, which is from about 1860 onwards, 1850s. There was no spying done in this country at all. And it was all partly because the British Empire was relatively peaceful to an extent, certainly within Europe. There wasn't really a feeling that we needed to emulate what those dastardly foreigners were doing, in particular the Europeans. And so there was a genuine feeling that an Englishman's home is his castle, and that people were a human right was to not be investigated, and the state shouldn't be expected to intervene in people's private lives, and therefore people had a right to privacy. And one of the things that really triggered this was the cause célèbre of some Italian revolutionaries who were living in London. The most famous one, it was two of them. The most famous one is a man called Garibaldi, but it was also his colleague Mazzini. They were living in the Clerkenwell area. And the British state, at the request of the Austrian government, actually, were opening their post. And I believe some of the information that was uncovered was passed back to the Austrians, and it led to the arrest and execution of a couple of Austrians sympathizing Italian supporters in the Austrian army. And they complained to their MP. And it was raised in the House of Commons that these people were being spied on. And it became such a huge, huge issue. And people revolted against it so much. By the way, the book that taught me this is this one here, Thoughts and Paranoia by Bernard Porter. Absolutely fascinating book. Really, really recommended if you're interested in that era and state surveillance of people. Fascinating book. Really, really interesting. They actually chose to disband any form of state surveillance of British people from about 1850, as I said, to about 1909. And for that period, they essentially didn't have an internal spying agency or any type of investigative process, and it even affected the police as well. So the CID, the Central Intelligence Division of the Metropolitan Police, was set up in the 1880s, I think it was. But before then, the police service was seen as preventative rather than as investigative. So it was merely a visible presence on the streets of the bobbies in their red breasts, that was meant to be enough. And there was very little in the form of actual investigation and detection at all. And in fact, again, I've got a couple of things to illustrate this. So this is the famous illustration. So essentially, the police were viewed as being buffers. Incompetent, it wasn't really seen as a career that was a choice for people, unless they were rather stupid. And this was reflected a bit later on in the Sherlock Holmes novels, where you contrasted the private consulting detective of Holmes with the rather inadequate, led by the nose, police of Scotland Yard, who were brought in at the last minute to do the arrests, but were otherwise led by the nose by the criminals and laughed at by the readers for their inability to see what was so obvious to Holmes himself. Mm-hmm. So it's a bit, this is not easy, this section, but the Jack the Ripper really brought out the public's perception of the inadequacies of the police. Mm-hmm. So I have here a quite famous illustration that was published in Punch magazine. This is in the middle of the horror, the terror of the Ripper period. So this was actually printed in September the 22nd, 1888. And the last victim, Mary Kelly, was discovered on the 9th of November that year. So this is in the middle of the period. And you can see here that although it's not naming the Ripper as such, it's really describing how the criminals at the time are able to play blind man's buff with a detective, or a police officer rather, who's been blindfolded and has been turned around and just led up the garden path by laughing criminals who are not actually paying any type of respect to the police, the public perception of the police at the time. Interesting enough, a week after this, there was this other illustration put out, which was an early form of the social justice method. It's really saying that this is a Ripper type criminal. But if you look at the text at the bottom, it actually says the nemesis of neglect. So this was really talking about the fact that it was a social issue. And it was the fact that poverty was being allowed to run unchecked, and people weren't doing any support for working class EastEnders and women and the whole poor were being treated like filth and dirt, which was therefore this is that whole concept that crime is caused by poverty. Again, it's quite a shocking idea that even back then they were aware of this, and people like before, like Dickens, etc., were writing about it, etc., etc. So the police were viewed as being incompetent and corrupt, and therefore still not doing much investigation, along with spying, the same thing as well. And it wasn't really until early 20th century that the media started a campaign which led to the creation of what we now know as the Secret Intelligence Service, or MI5 and MI6. And it was total Reds under the bed scares, but it wasn't the Reds, it was the Germans. So there were books published by Erskine Childers, The Riddle of the Sands, The 39 Steps. A little bit later on, then there was another book, The Invasion of England, 1910, by a man called Quex, Quex. These were all serialized in the press as well, and the press barons were very keen on pushing what the modern day red top equivalents of pushing the idea that there were thousands, if not tens of thousands, of German agents infiltrating our society secretly, under the beds, as it were, ready for undermining society and preparing us for an invasion. And it was untrue. Completely untrue, but the government felt bounced into acting. And so, to a certain extent, quite fortunately, because this was about 1909, so it was a few years before the beginning of the First World War, and we definitely needed to have spy agencies in place in order to successfully combat, and first of all, very successfully combat German spy opportunities. That it was actually, very fortunate, but it wasn't a natural order in the late 19th century for Britain to have, or England to have, any type of spying service whatsoever, or even any type of investigative service. So the other thing is that when the CID was first created, they were created in Scotland Yard as a subdivision, and I think that their primary function was to counter what was known as the Fenian menace, which was the precursors of the Irish Republican Army. It was the agitators for Irish separation, and they did cause terrorist outrages. In fact, one of the first things they did, I believe, was to blow up a public toilet. It was underneath the CID offices in Great Scotland Yard, and it didn't injure any of the officers at the time, luckily. But still, it was a sign of force and a lack of respect for them that they got blown up by the toilet underneath their offices. The other thing was, at the very beginning of the creation of the CID, again, it was a total disaster. There were about 9 members of it, 8 of whom were put on trial and found guilty of corruption because they were involved in a gambling, I think it was horse racing betting ring. And the only reason the 9th one wasn't prosecuted is because he turned evidence against the other 8. So a very inauspicious start to policing in London. So that's, a bit of background as to spying in this country. And all these operations were really centered upon Westminster. So the City of London had its own constables to a certain extent, and night watchmen. But it was really 1740s that were called the Bow Street Runners were created around Covent Garden area, where the Opera House is now, because the whole Covent Garden was called the Square of Sin. It was where you went to be, all the pleasures of life could be there, as well as all the threats and dangers of life. Everything was there. But it wasn't until 1829 that a man called Robert Peel, Home Secretary, I believe at the time, later on Prime Minister, created the Metropolitan Police. There had been a small police force before then, which was the Docks Police in the East End, because they were protecting the ports, which were the centre of the world's port activity. Very, very huge volumes of stuff was being nicked from the warehouses along the ports then, so it was important to have a police force there. So actually, they're the earliest form of London police was the water police, but the Met Police founded in 1829, and ironically, Robert Peel, I believe, gave his name to 2 nicknames for the police. So Peelers, that's from Robert Peel, but also Bobbies as well, because his first name was Robert, Bob Peel. So both his first and last names became shorthand for the police. So they started in 1829. And they started in a place called Scotland Yard, Great Scotland Yard, which is now it's a ministry and it's a hotel on the back of it as well. No plugs, but it's a great hotel, the Great Scotland Yard Hotel. And they've moved several times since then, but that was where police started. And ironically, nowadays, with all the different divisions of the Secret Services, you've got MI5, which is the equivalent to the American FBI. So it's internal within the country borders. Then MI6, which is the equivalent to the CIA, so external spies, like James Bond works for MI6. Then you've got GCHQ, which is Government Communications Headquarters. That's equivalent to, I think, the NSA, and it employs actually as much as both MI5 and MI6 combined do, mostly because of cyber and the fact that they have to employ so many technical staff who are dealing with the new threat that poses. And a friend of my wife's used to work for them as a Russian translator in the 80s, by the way. She doesn't talk about it, but they're based in Cheltenham mostly. They do have a London branch as well, near Victoria Station. But they set up and still very vigilant. But they're now recruiting from a much wider segments of society than they used to. And this is one of the major vulnerabilities that particularly MI6 had in the 1930s and onwards. It was almost exclusively recruited from men, from the moneyed upper classes who'd been to the right schools, gone to the right universities, were members of the right clubs, could vouch for each other. And of course, it was much easier for them to infiltrate with that sort of cover. Than it is nowadays, when they're subject to much better vetting, when we're trying to create a much more diverse, to represent society, subsection of employees working for the Secret Services, and different era. But yeah, so my tours, there's so much to cover. I started in a hotel. So I generally start in a place called the Caxton Street Hotel, St. Ermin's Hotel, which is a unique location for spies. It's in the center of what used to be multiple spy agencies around it. So on one side in Palmer Street, you had GCHQ, the listening service. Then behind it in Broadway, you had MI6, which was external services. Then south of it in Victoria, you had Artillery Mansions, which amongst other things was the creation of fake documentation and passports, things like that as well. And then to the east of it, you had Scotland Yard, which was the home of what was known as Special Branch. And Special Branch are the wing of the police that deal with the intelligence services. And actually a serving officer in SIS, MI5, 6, cannot arrest anybody. They have to bring in Special Branch to carry out arrests. So that's that connection there as well. So this was, and there were other agencies around there, like D Agency in the Second World War. So it was the centre, and also it was very close to the Ministry of Defence, 10 Downing Street, Houses of Parliament. So it was an obvious nexus, and it had lots of bars in it. So it became a meeting place for spies. It was where some spies were recruited. I believe that it's where Kim Philby, one of the Cambridge Five, had his interview to join MI6 in a bar of that hotel. A man called Eddie Chapman, very famous sort of double agent. No one really knows which side he was actually on. Agent Snow gave information in that bar as well. And one of the most important things in it is it was where a very secret agency was created in 1940 by Winston Churchill. And luckily, the hotel acknowledged this, and there's a whole little display case in the corner of the lobby, which has got an amazing selection of objects within it relating to this agency. So the agency was called SOE, Special Operations Executive. And it was Churchill's idea to create a volunteer force of mostly civilians, I believe. There's some army as well, who were bilingual. Many of them were natural foreigners who escaped and wanted to serve to defeat Nazism. So they would be, and he actually brought the heads of the agencies together in that hotel for the first meeting, in which he said, I want to create this special operation executive, and their mission is to set Europe ablaze. So where they would take these agents, train them up, give them clothing that was identical to what locals would have, tickets in their pockets, everything that would make them blend into the locality. A lot of them would then be dropped, or mostly left by short takeoff planes called the Lysanders, single engine planes that just drop in with torches laid out on the fields to allow them to find their locations. And they would work with the local Maquis, with the resistance, sabotage, telephone comms, and the average life expectancy of a radio operator was 6 weeks. Can you imagine that? Knowing that, and they've got all sorts of equipment on display in the hotel. So includes a lot of it was developed by another agency called MI9, which was escape and evasion. As it happens, more information about them recently has revealed they're also involved with intelligence gathering as well, which is not so well known. There's a really good historian called Helen Fry who's writing about them at the moment. But predominantly they were dealing with the equipment. So the maps, for example. So you'd get a silk map, which you would have like this one. This is a replica made by the Imperial War Museum. And so the map will be printed on very thin silk, and it would contain escape routes. So you would have on it. This is a European map showing. There's a key here as well, and it would include boat journeys, railways, roads, etc., to help with escape and evasion. So if you were a refugee, or if you were a prisoner of war who'd escaped, etc. These maps would often be sent out to you, hidden inside the Red Cross parcels, in the base of, Monopoly. The makers of Monopoly agreed to create special Monopoly sets, which had all sorts of hidden equipment inside them as well, to be smuggled into the prisoner of war camps. Compasses were especially important to allow you to navigate while you were with all the road signs being removed, etc., and just with a map to help navigate by. So they would hide them inside collared studs of shirts, or they would put them in chest sets or in combs and brushes. You'd have at the top of the brush would slide away, and there'd be little things hidden inside it as well. And all these things are on display in the St. Ermin's Hotel. And the whole floor of the hotel was taken over by SOE in the war as well. It's just an amazing place to start. You've also got there's a division bell in the hotel, not really a spy connection, but it's more to do with when members of parliament who had decided in advance, because they were faithful to their party line, how they would vote during debates in parliament. They were free to not be in the Palace of Westminster during that debate itself. So many times they would go out and meet for meetings or whatever they wanted to do in hotels nearby, and they would have a bell in the hotel. And when that bell rang, it meant you just had enough time to drop everything, run back to the Houses of Parliament and vote to ensure that you were registered in the lobby. So it's called a division bell, because you divide the House to decide if yes or no for the votes. And there's one in the hotel as well. And there's even a tunnel in the hotel that it's alleged, to say that, used to go all the way to the Palace of Westminster to allow MPs to get there unobserved for voting as well. I'm not sure if that's true, but the tunnel's been excavated as far as the courtyard in front of the hotel. Okay. And you can get into it too. You go up the steps in the hotel, the sweeping staircase, and there's a door. You go through it and you can see the staircase narrower winding down behind you, past some cleaning equipment there as well. There's also in the hotel a letter that was sent about 11 years ago by a woman who'd seen an article about the hotel in the Evening Standard. And she said, I used to work for SOE in the war. I was a coder. And this is a silk message. So she's actually posted them, and they framed it, her letter and the envelope and the silk square, which has coded messages on it. It's all numbers and letters, obviously. I don't know what it says. And she says, I was working for SOE in the war, so I thought you'd like to have a copy have my silk coded message here. I was never lucky enough to be actually billeted at the St. Ermin's Hotel. We were sent to Baker Street without even a cup of coffee, is what she says in the letter. It's quite funny. But that's on display in the hotel as well. So that's where I start my tour. And from then on, I go round. It's about, depends on how much spying people want. But my tours last up to about 3 hours, normally an hour and a half. But I just love doing it. I did one on Sunday. Yesterday. For fantastic weather. That was a group of about 10 people. And that was actually a prize. I volunteered a tour for a charity So it was a charity fundraising auction. And so I said, I'll give my tour to the family, and the bidders, I don't know how much they paid, but I hope it was a lot of money. It was all for cancer research. And yes, that's what I did yesterday. But the other thing I do is I do use some magic on my tours because there's quite a lot of magic in spycraft.
Yep.
There was a man called Jasper Maskelyne, and if
Yep.
you heard about him
Yep.
in World War II, he did write his own biography that people think he may have overstated some of his actions, but he was certainly working in North Africa and dealing with the disguising or creation of fake tanks and hiding other weapons and devices to deceive the Rommel and the Afrika Korps about where the attacks would take place.
Yeah.
So I talk about him, but also in the James Bond books, in Moonraker. Bond is at the beginning, he's asked by his boss C to go and look at Blades Club, which stands in for some of the other clubs in St James's, like Boodles or Whites. He says there's this guy Hugo Drax, and we're not sure if he's cheating, but he seems to be suspiciously winning a lot. And so in the book, Bond prepares himself the night before he goes to watch Hugo Drax play at the club. He gets down a book from his shelf, which I've got. Unfortunately, it's the next room. Otherwise, I bring my own copy out for you. It's called Scarn on Cards. So this guy Scarn, Scarne, fantastic, famous magician, wrote some really interesting books about it. And Bond basically just reads the entire book and practices all night long to get himself ready to try and work out how or whether Drax is cheating. So I use that as an introduction to bring my own magic effects into it and provide a similar story about it as well. Yeah. So that's that. But the other thing I do is I try to incorporate tradecraft into my spy tours also as well. So I teach people some techniques. So, for example, at the beginning of the tour, I put an envelope behind the reception at the hotel, addressed to the person who's booked me for the tour or one of their group, whose names I've got, and I just say that go to the reception. And once they arrive, I said, I think that's it for you at reception. Go to there and say your name and say there's the code word they have to give, which is normally St. Ermines or whatever, and the staff will hand the envelope over to them, and then I say, and it says do not open until instructed on the back, and then at a certain point, they open it, and it's got a very simple code wheel in it. It's like letters twice in two circles. You can move it around. It's a very simple encryption method. Because I talk about dead letter drops, and at one point in the tour, I talk about how in a lot of John le Carré books, people would carry a stick of chalk around with them, which they then use to mark a post or a tree or a lamppost or something, or a letterbox. And the message would then mean there's something for you in the dead letter drop. And interestingly, in the book that I talked about with you earlier by Amaryllis Fox, A Life Undercover, one of the things that she gave away, which I believe the CIA were not happy about, is that the modern equivalent of having that stick of chalk and striping it down somewhere is you get a coffee card, a preloaded coffee card from whoever, Costa Coffee, Starbucks. And if you buy something from it, your handler is monitoring the balance, and as soon as they see it drop, then that's a signal to them. That means that you want to meet. And I'm not sure if it's as elaborate as, depending on how much you spend or the type of coffee you buy, different messages. Probably it is, but in the book she just says it's a message, and that's the modern day equivalent of leaving a message in a piece of chalk, or you would otherwise have to move a plant in your window sill to a certain place, or leave the curtains open at night. All sorts of different codes would be created to communicate with your handlers. So in that particular case, I printed off beforehand a message, which I hide in a dead letter drop somewhere on the route. And I basically, there's a tree at one point, which for some reason has got lots of chalk marks on it. I didn't put it there in case the little park wardens are watching, not me. But near it, there's another tree, and basically there's a hole in the tree. So I just used that to put I printed it onto Tyvek, which is a type of really waterproof paper that can't be ripped. So it's like really durable. And actually one day, I put it there. Someone must have been watching me, because when I came back later, it was gone. So, but luckily I had an extra copy in my pocket as a preparation in case that happens. I say, look, here's one I prepared earlier, just, etc. And all it does is it says you have passed the test. So, it's very, but it's just illustrative of a spy craft, tradecraft, as they call it. I also teach them, there's a bridge on the route. So I teach them like a brush pass, which is where you just, people pass each other and then one gives the other in a hand like that. I also, at a later date, we stop at a cafe and I show them how you get two bags with your coffee in them. You put them next to each other on the ground as you're chatting, and then you pick the other one up, etc. So just very, very simple things. But people seem to really enjoy. Yeah, it's participation. So rather than just purely passive, observing, I think people remember stuff and learn stuff and feel connected to stuff much more if they're actually involved in it and it's something they have to do themselves. And that's for me what I'm always trying to design my tours to have an element in it of engagement, and or even if it's just as simple as telling a story in which they have to imagine a situation and what someone would feel if they had to be faced with a problem, or what life is like in everyday life with the filth in the streets, or how they would deal with the Great Fire of London or the plague or things like that as well, or the Blitz. So that's sort of how I approach creating what my style of guiding. And but spying, it's been something I didn't actually intend to do much spy tours when I started out. I just chose Lane to London Spy because of that book that I shared with you earlier. But it's become something I really enjoy doing now. And I get good feedback about it. So I think I'm not doing a bad job. But I'm always looking for more things to try and find out. So for example, I've lost them. I can't find them anywhere. I recently bought, they weren't very expensive, some stamps in Russian stamps that were had Kim Philby on them, because there was a whole set, I think it was in the 80s, where they celebrated famous patriots, I think they called them, basically spies, who had, and Kim Philby was obviously one of the main ones, even though by that time he was never entirely trusted after he quit and joined Moscow. So he was really never really entirely given a role afterwards. He was given a wife, given an apartment, and trotted out occasionally. In fact, one of my friends, Teresa Cherfas, she is a TV producer. She's a fluent Russian speaker, and she's produced some incredible documentaries with her friend George, BBC documentaries about they managed to get access to spies. So she's interviewed Philby, she interviewed George Blake, for example, and others as well. Burgess, I think. I'm not sure. But anyway, she's specialized in finding out their true stories after they've finished and bringing to life the investigations and their whole betrayal story. Fascinating. So again, if you get the chance to watch any of the documentaries that my friend Teresa has made about spying, Teresa Cherfas and George, I don't know what they're called now, but highly, highly recommended.
Definitely. I'll put that on my list. If I haven't, I've seen a lot of that lately.
Mm-hmm.
My wife and I, we watch a lot of documentaries and shows along that lines.
Right.
It's our pastime. We're always doing research. It never really ends.
Absolutely. But me too. As I said, I've got so many books here. But there's another, if you're looking for a really good resource about GCHQ, there's a guy called Aldrich. I think I've got this book here somewhere. I can't find it anywhere. So Aldrich, it's GCHQ is like the shadow agency. It's like the Cinderella agency. It's not one hasn't got the same type of glamour as MI6 in particular. But like I said, it's got as many staff as both agencies combined, and some of the stories he's come up with, absolutely incredible. And nowadays, with the emphasis on cyber as well, and like Pegasus and what the Israeli private companies have been developing, and I have to make the assumption that anything I have on this is accessible to any government, really.
True. Yeah. What's your favorite little-known spot to visit in London?
It depends where I am. So, well, I suppose the one that people get impressed by most is it's also one of my most popular videos. So it's if you visit the Tower of London, well, there are two things next to each other. So you come out of Tower Hill tube station, and there's a row of steps, and you can look across the road towards the river, and in front of you, you've got the Tower of London. Fascinating. But I'm not going there. So what I do is I get people to look where they are, because there's two things there. First of all, there is a sundial that's been placed, massive sundial that's been placed on top of the hill overlooking the Tower of London. And the sundial was commissioned by London Transport in about 1992 to commemorate 200 years of London Transport or whatever. And the artist put elements of London history from the Roman invasion all the way up to the present day around the sundial in great detail with a lot of research, but he hid something in it as well. So as you go around, it's chronological, and I've done several videos about elements within it. And he's done a lot of research for it, very good. A few dates are wrong, but what he did was he was quite politically active, and this was towards the end of Margaret Thatcher's reign, premiership, everyone to describe it. And so he snuck in a tiny image of Margaret Thatcher into the sundial that wasn't disclosed until it was unveiled, and by then it was too late to remove it. Although I don't think his clients were very happy about it. So he managed to put her image between the Black Death on one side and the Peasants' Revolt on the other. Peasants' Revolt, by the way, was caused by a poll tax, which was partly what brought Margaret Thatcher down. And in the middle, they got her image, and she's riding a broomstick. Sort of a cartoon caricature of her with Maggie written on this handbag that's in front of her as well. And famously, her handbag is what she used to, metaphorically, club her opponents into submission with her force of personality. So that's quite an amusing thing that I enjoy pointing out to people. But if you go behind it, you walk down the steps behind that and go back towards the station, and you walk up towards Aldgate, one of the ancient gates of Roman London. You're following the path of the original Roman wall there. There's a hotel on the right to the east called the Leonardo Hotel. And it's 60s, very good hotel. But there's a covered courtyard in it that's got a car park at the back, and you walk through that public accessible area. And at the back of it, you've got this amazing, well-preserved original section of the almost 2,000 years old Roman wall right in front of you. And it's got the different layers. So halfway up, it becomes medieval, and that's where you've got the arrow slots and a walkway at the top. But the lower half of it is genuine Roman. And it's just astonishing to find it there, because it's not signposted in any way, and it just jumps out at you, and suddenly you were transported back. And you can see the different layers. Like I said, there's the ragstone, there's the bricks, tiles, and the cement, and the two layers with the rubble in the middle, etc. It's just absolutely astonishing. So that's probably what I enjoy most, surprising people with on my tours. Just you turn the corner and you're presented with an incredible and very large stretch of 1,800-year-old history.
That's wonderful. I love hidden histories, hidden places that you walk into and you wouldn't know it from the street.
That's right.
There's
one of my friends, Katie, another brilliant tour guide. Her tag is "Look Up London," and so she's always, what's around us. I'm look up and look down, but basically, there's so much that you don't realize unless you actually actively train yourself to
look for,
slow down and look for. And that's part of what I've taught myself to do as a guide, is to so if I'm getting a commission for a new tour, the first thing I'll do is just go to the area and walk everything, walk all the side streets, and don't go with any preconceptions. Don't read. I tend not to read any of my resources about the area beforehand. I just go there and I just take as many photographs as I can of things that interest me. And so I prefer to build my own tours up from the bottom up, but then I will go back, because obviously there's a lot that you won't know about until you read about it. It won't be signposted. It won't be obvious. So I do have to layer stuff in as well. But I generally find that there's also, when you're, as a guide, you're taught, everything's got what's called a TVP, which is a top visual point. So for every place you stop people to talk about something, you need to be able to direct their attention towards an object. It could be an architectural detail, could be a building in the distance, could be a street in which something happened. Ideally, if you've got a sign or something, or even an object you can share with somebody and say, look, this comes from this spot, or it's connected, it was made here, or sold here, or whatever, or happened here. But it's that idea of having something people can focus on rather than just an arid talking at people without anything for them to actually focus on. And so again, you need to construct. So I view my role as being an entertainer, really. As I said, a friend. I think I'm a friend. That's how I like to come across. And I don't lie about stuff, and I hope I don't exaggerate stuff as well. But I've been on a lot of. I remember a lot of lectures at university or school, which is so dull, and it doesn't do anyone any service to not try and entertain as well. And yeah, I use media of music, poetry, I bring a lot of objects out with me and I don't expect people to remember much necessarily. I do at the end of every tour I do. I got into the habit a while ago of making notes of what went wrong, what happened. What could have been better? And the other thing is I try to get feedback as well from LinkedIn, not LinkedIn, TripAdvisor. So I've got 500 and I know exactly how many 5-star reviews I've got because I keep a methodical track of them. But I know I'm number 19 in the London rankings out of over 1,700 guides, and nearly I've only got 5 4-star reviews out of 538, so not bad. And every 4-star I've got has made me really upset. But I should actually take it on the nose and realize that it's valid, and these are what people genuinely think, and it's not. I should roll with it. But it is hard to take criticism sometimes. We all feel personally involved with things. But so I do encourage people to share stuff with me as well. So many people I've been on a tour with have their own stories about the place that, I would make a note of, and they just love having the opportunity to, become part of the story. And that really makes me happy as well.
With talking about the Blitz, my grandfather was there during the Blitz. He was
No way.
in the bomb disposal unit.
Unbelievable.
And he had some really interesting stories. The sergeant would sit on top of one of the unexploded bombs, light his match off of it to light his cigar, and joke and go on. And meanwhile, my grandfather, who's green, is going, "Oh my God, I'm gonna die." And of course, this is a country Canadian boy in London. So yeah.
So how did he manage to become working as a bomb disposal?
He was a Canadian soldier on loan to the bomb disposal unit because he was getting married in that area. So,
oh my gosh,
yeah,
that's extraordinary.
yeah.
So there's a memorial to the firefighters by St. Paul's Cathedral. Have you been to the UK? I'm not sure if you ever visited.
No, I actually, yes, I have, but I was 4 years old and I don't remember much of it.
Fair enough. Well, so if you do come, then if you go to St. Paul's Cathedral in the City of London on the west side of the city, it's a location that Winston Churchill wanted to keep safe as a symbol of defiance against the Nazis. This was at a time when Hitler had identified, I believe he wanted to, if he'd won the war, he would have placed his SS team in a place called the Minories, Apex House. He had it targeted for them. He was going to move Nelson's column from Trafalgar Square to Munich. All these plans to destroy the British resistance ideas. And St. Paul was a symbol of resistance. So it was bombed so many times, mostly by incendiary bombs. And Churchill recruited a team of firefighters who were stationed all over the roof of the cathedral, most of whom were trained architects or drafts, architect students, whatever. And they were there all night long through the entire Blitz. ensuring that the cathedral would not burn down. They had stirrup pumps, they had buckets of sand, they had water, because the incendiary devices would parachute down and burn with phosphorus or something like that. That was very, very fierce. And obviously, it was a supreme target. There was 2 high explosive bombs that were also dropped on St. Paul's as well, at least, one of which fell through the east side and landed by the American altar where it is now. Another one landed right outside the entrance to the cathedral on the west side, and it stuck in the ground there. And I can't remember his name, but the bomb disposal expert who defused it, he was given the George Cross, which is the highest civilian medal that can be won. It's second only to the Victoria Cross, which is just a soldier's medal. But sadly, that man was later cashiered for stealing from the fire service, apparently. So there's if you go to the Imperial War Museum in London, in Oval area, the whole of the top floor, the 5th floor, is dedicated to medals that have been won, either Victoria Crosses or the George Crosses, the equivalents. Because there's a man called Lord Ashmore, very wealthy man, I think a Conservative Party politician, who has cornered the market in these medals. And he's bought literally hundreds of them. And he's pushed the prices at auction up for them to, I think, around, depending on the story, £250,000 for a Victoria Cross nowadays.
Wow.
So no one can bid against him generally. And he's lent them like a semi-permanent loan to the Imperial War Museum. So the entire floor is full of all the medals that he possesses. And each one of them's got a story behind them as well. So they included in that the one that was won by the man, I believe by the man who defused the bomb outside St. Paul's Cathedral and then got cashiered for corruption later on as well. And some of the medals there were awarded to members of SOE. So we talked about SOE earlier, in particular to some of the women who were in SOE. There's a famous spy called Violet Szabo. Have you heard about her at all?
Heard of it. Yeah.
Yeah. So they made her life into a film called Carve Her Name with Pride. There's also several others, at least 2 more as well, who were executed also. And it's very, very, you're not allowed to take photographs or films in that museum wing. Otherwise I would have done so, but I respect, the intention there. But going back to SOE and the story, so there was a man called his name now. He was a poet and a writer working for SOE, and his job was to create the coding methodology for the agents before they went into occupied territory. Leo Marx was his name. Initially, what they would do is each agent would be given a book, and there would be a section of the book that would be used to code their messages. But the Germans found that was a very easy thing to detect. They just had to find the book and they could decode the message. So what Leo Marx was brought in to do was to write poems for people to then a personal code, which would be unique to them and allow that agent to decipher it without it ever being broken by the Germans. And I will read out to you the poem that he wrote for the agent Violet Szabo. I to be honest, I find it hard to read it without breaking down. Sometimes it's such an emotional poem.
Yeah.
When I was in Manchester last year, sadly my best friend passed away very tragically young of a heart attack, and I had to read out his eulogy. And as I was about to go into the church, I noticed that this poem had been written on a tombstone just next to the entrance of it.
Yeah.
And I had no idea if the people who chose that poem there knew that it was originated as a secret coded message in the Second World War. But the poem is called The Life That I Have by Leo Marx. And it was written for Violet Szabo by Leo Marx, who had just lost his own girlfriend. She'd been killed in a car accident, I think in Canada, actually. But the poem is this. It says, the life that I have is all that I have, and the life that I have is yours. The love that I have of the life that I have is yours and yours and yours. A sleep I shall have, a rest I shall have, yet death will be but a pause. But a piece of my years in the long green grass will be yours and yours and yours.
Thank you for listening to Part 1 of London Spy. Part 2 will be released in the near future. For now, find David on TikTok under the name The London Spy, or visit his website at thelondonspy.com, where you can book tours and find more information. This podcast is a member of the Parasortium community, a safe place to explore and create. Find more information at parasortium.com. Research conducted by Sarah Goettge. Interview by AJ Lunn. If you like this video, please like, subscribe, and donate if you can. Official merch for the community will be released soon, so stay tuned for updates.